Hello and welcome back. A lot of you guys have been requesting a guide for urbanization or upgrading your location rank, and so that's what we're going to be doing here today. First, we're going to go into kind of general principles, then we'll discuss why urbanization is good, then we'll talk in more detail about the various considerations, and then we'll kind of provide some archetypes or example locations of which fit a particular pattern that is going to inform whether or not you want to urbanize. So briefly, urbanization in general is just going to produce more value. Cities are better than towns in a very general sense. If we look at our tax base here and we clear out all the riffraff, we can see that if we swap between tax base and our urbanization level, there's a really strong correlation between the two, especially in areas where we've actually built up. And so you are going to get more value out of urbanization. With that said, there are a few factors in which you don't want to urbanize. Namely, the biggest or most significant one, especially in the early game, is going to be the maximum RGO size. So good RGOs, you're not going to want to urbanize. You're also going to lose population growth if you urbanize, and food is an important consideration. And I think generally speaking, the way you should view food is that food buys urbanization. You can't support as many urban locations if you don't have enough food, and so you should look at it as a resource that unlocks potential urbanization. With that said, urbanization, because it is more powerful, you want to have it in good locations with effective force multipliers. And there are two really important force multipliers. The first one is control, where this is going to multiply all the value, and this is going to be what you get in terms of the tax base. And the second one is market access, which is going to, roughly speaking, do the exact same thing. And so if you have a location with 90 control, 90 market access, it's only going to produce 81% value because these are multiplicatively stacking with each other. And if you have a place with 50 control and 50 market access, it's only going to produce 25% value. And so it's important that you urbanize, all other things equal, in kind of these power-based locations with a high overlap between having control and also having high market access. And so this is going to be another thing, but there are two other kind of important considerations that are force multipliers, which is that high population areas confer more benefits when they are urbanized, and so generally speaking, you're going to want to urbanize high population areas, and then also you are going to get additional force multiplier in development, where you are going to get added things that are generally speaking good for urban areas from having higher and higher development. Alright, let's start off slow and talk about the differences between the location ranks. There are kind of two classes of difference. The bonuses you get on the location themselves as a result of this, and the buildings you are capable of building. Let's start off with the bonuses themselves. As we already kind of discussed, maximum RGO size, you prefer to have better RGOs in rural areas. Population growth, all other things equal, if you just need more pop, you would rather have more places be rural. And then local food production is a bonus, whereas a bunch of other stuff comes in when we're a town, but as it relates to food, now you are going to get a malus. And remember, towns effectively, or food effectively, is buying you urbanization. It's a little bit less relevant in the western locations or the eastern locations where pop is really high, but it is definitely a factor. And we're going to kind of go through this a little bit quickly because these are things we're going to touch on in the future, but these extra pop promotions are going to allow you to promote past the building capacity. Your capacity for specialized pops in a location is going to be equal to all the building levels and the employment that they provide. So you can see here in the burgers, we have 9,000 employed, but an additional 4,000-ish there for 13,000, right? And these additional levels are coming from stuff like the location rank bonus. And the levels where there is employment are coming from there being potential employment. This will increase the max potential burgers as well. And so what we can do is we can promote up to this. You will not be able to promote above your cap. And so the urban areas are going to increase your cap, and the higher tier pops, nobles, clerics, burgers, are going to have consumption profiles where they consume a lot more goods. You can hover this here to take a look at what they are buying, and sometimes they buy more than they consume. We call that free stimmy, and so you see these are the demands that they place, and these demands will push up prices in the market and give you potential for more profitable buildings. So they stimulate your economy in an indirect way. We also have more supported supporting building levels, not too relevant because you often won't be hitting the cap in rural, but it becomes relevant as we get to urban. Max control, it's going to increase the value of locations, and this is not just a 5% increase. Don't look at this as a 5% increase. Mathematically, this increase is always going to be bigger than 5%. If you only have 20% control and you go to 25, this is 25% 5% increase. If you have, 50 control, this is a 10% increase. It also gives you population capacity a little bit, and percentage capacity. It is possible for this to actually overcome and allow you to have more population growth, because unused pop capacity gives you population growth, right? And so we see here the bonus for available free land. Mathematically, if you are overpopulated in a rural area, sometimes your available free land, which is equal to the amount of potential pops you are missing, or is inversely proportional to the amount of pops you're missing at a location, sometimes upgrading the location rank can actually give you more population growth. But the available pop capacity is going to drive population growth and is going to help bring more pops there. Coming back, we can see that we are also going to get, we talked about the food capacity helps a little bit for pop growth. For the city, it's much of the same thing, just in a bigger, more pronounced way, with a couple of little things to maybe note, which is that the amount of burgers that increases disproportionately large. The max control is +5. You gain pop promotion speed. This is very strong early on. When you don't have a lot of this modifier, max supported levels, this is a huge uptick. And also max population capacity, this is a huge uptick. This really allows you to support enormous populations. Also, you do get a construction capacity, but this is, it's a modifier that's good, but it's strange to evaluate here. Now, that's kind of the differences between these levels of, or these types of locations, right? Also, what is keyly and very importantly different is they're going to control what buildings you can build. Most location ranks can build these buildings that are going to be in the rural raw material section, rather. And you can see here the symbols of all these associated types. And these buildings do not scale very well because they don't have upgraded levels, generally speaking. I think that the coal one has an upgraded level or an upgraded form. Yeah, there's an upgrade for the coal, but for the most part, they all have the same levels. So some of these are rural only, like the force multipliers for RGO, further cementing rural areas are good for RGOs. You also have the sheep farm as one of the more powerful ones that's rural only. But these get outclassed and outscaled in the aggregate by the buildings that can only be built in urban areas, with the exception of the Mason, which can be built anywhere, and I think this can be built anywhere as well. The ones that are in orange are employing burgers. You only get access to burgers in urban locations, that's towns and cities, and these buildings are a lot stronger, and not only are they stronger, they have upgraded forms. So as the game goes on, and you gain access to level 2, 3, and 4 buildings, they will get disproportionately even stronger. So the PMs will get better, that's production methods, or the inputs and outputs and what value you get from these will steadily get better as the game goes on, making urbanization even more profitable. But already at baseline, the urban buildings tend to be better, and this is a huge reward that you get because these are, again, no circle, not allowed in rural areas. So the rural areas are kind of a little bit more of a support role for the urban areas, and the urban areas are going to be where you extract value. Beyond this, there's also a ton of civilian infrastructure buildings, stuff like the temple, which just gives +5 control, only in urban areas. Stuff like the university, only in urban areas, and there's a tons of examples of this, and so you unlock different building types when you urbanize here as well. Alright, so let's talk about the two biggest kind of negative pressures that we have on our economy, which is control. As we mentioned before, control will moderate how much contribution you get to the tax base, and then market access, which works very similarly but slightly different. In Oxford, we have 89% market access, and the way that it works for RGOs is going to be the same as the way it works for control, where we are going to be multiplying this number times what we would get per level to the tax base, and we are going to get that amount instead added to the tax base. But with buildings, it works slightly different. You are still going to get an amount that is multiplied by the market access in the case of Oxford 89, but you are going to get this by fewer goods being produced. So if we look at and hover the amount of goods produced, we will see that we have, hey, this normal multiplier, we are producing 1, and then it is multiplied by the market access. And so we will only produce 90% of the goods that we would otherwise in Oxford. Now, also the inputs go down by 90%, so it's not this just completely dead value type of modifier, but this is multiplicatively decreasing the amount of goods you output. Now, as we mentioned before, if you have 90 and 90, you end up getting 81% value, but this is going to be a little bit misleading, and it is more important that you have high control and high market access than at first it appears for kind of two reasons. One is kind of a complicated effect we'll discuss at the end of the section, but the other is because of a compounding effect. When you get more money, you reinvest it, which allows you to get more money faster, which brings us to the need for math. And with the need for math, I feel the need to tell you that if you have a child under the tender age of 38, and they're in the room with you, make them leave. Have them lock them in the cupboard, throw them down the stairs, put them in a tire, roll the tire down the hill, because this is not going to be fit for their eyes. This, of course, being a spreadsheet. So we have a spreadsheet that calculates the compounding effect of having less control and less market access. Here you can see this column is control, this column is market access, and with this, it is important to note that we are looking at this months to replace the cost of the building. And this is what we are primarily concerned with. With this, we notice that, hey, the capital, if it's 100 control, if you have a market in your capital, 100 control, 100 market access, it's 70 months to replace the cost of the building. If you have 80 control and 80 market access, which is solid enough, it takes 108 months to replace the cost of the building. But when you replace the cost of the building, you're going to build another one, right? And so over the course of 10 years, with this 80-80, we're going to get 115% growth, but we will have double that growth with 100-100. So it's you're producing 60 or 2/3 of the value, roughly speaking, with the 80-80, right? 64% of the total tax-based contribution. But if you consider compounding, this is going to be double the value over the course of 10 years. It gets even more pronounced if you could figure it over the course of 25 years, and so on and so forth. And this is also very, very much noticeable if you have, for example, 40 control and 60% market access. Over the course of 10 years, you get 33% growth. It takes you 25 years to double your kind of capacity. And this is really, really kind of driving home how much more valuable it is to have stuff, in these power bases than not. Now, to be fair, there is a very significant throttle that kind of undermines this analysis, which is we cannot ad infinitum expand in our capital where we have a market, because there is a max level here in terms of the amount we can build of the best building possible, right? And so if we wanted to build more printer shops, we would have to build them elsewhere. And also, there is an eventual throttle with the soft cap on building levels, which will undermine our ability to continue building, because this will increase the cost of the building here. All right, let's take a quick look at an example. We know in London we are 100 control, 100 market access, but if we go to a location like Manchester out here, we are going to have 30 control. Now, if this were a city, it would be 40 control, and we would get 33% more contribution to the tax base by virtue of making it a city. So this is not a dead kind of modifier or concept, but also we have 65% market access. And so what we would receive is that very, very low percentage growth in the example we looked at, which I think was 40%, 60%, right? That's roughly speaking what we would receive if we were to urbanize Manchester, and we can't even turn Manchester into a city. It doesn't have enough pops. And so generally speaking, you can see this area, we have not expanded a lot out into this location or in these locations because we don't have higher control there, and we are generally preferring not to urbanize too much in these locations. Now, for control specifically, a lot of this is going to be driven by our proximity. Let's take a look at a cleaner version of this proximity map mode. And so where we are going to be looking to build is going to be in areas with high proximity, because that is generally speaking the biggest driver of control. But not only that, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, we want to build our markets around the fact that we have high control in these areas, because the markets are movable, our capital is not. And so since our capital radiates out from, or our proximity radiates out from the capital, we would want to do stuff like, if you take a look at Antwerp, look at our proximity around Antwerp. This is another opportunity for a power base. We have this circle around Antwerp that has high control, right? We have this circle around London that has high control. We have this mini circle around Tancarville that has high control. And so these are areas where we are going to have the opportunity to do this, and we kind of build the markets around this. Now, for this kind of raises the question, okay, Manchester, why you have 65% market access, why don't you just turn Manchester into its own market or create another market up here such that you will have more market access overall? And the problem with this is that, and we will not go into too great of depth of this, your overall prices will lead to better profits for your buildings and your RGOs the bigger your market is. And this is a pressure against creating a lot of markets. Now, obviously, more market access means more contribution to the tax base, so there's a pressure for it. But to speak of an example here, we have wool. We have wool, and it's got 426 sell orders, 292 buy orders, and it has a price as a result of those sell and buy orders of 182. If we had more sell orders, the price would be lower. If we had more buy orders, the price would be higher, right? And this is going to help both the producers of the building and also the buildings that use it as input, or the producers of the RGO. So to take a look at Durham, which I believe is a sheep RGO, a wool RGO, here, with the price as it is, we will have a higher contribution to the tax base from the RGO the more demand we have, right? We are producing the RGO, more demand means a higher price, so 1.82, and so this is going to make the building more profitable, right? But similarly, in Oxford, let's find Oxford, we are producing textiles. And right now, this has an output of this of these cloth, and it has a demand for the wool. The demand for the wool is pushing up the price of the wool, allowing the wool to be more profitable. But similarly, if we had no wool sold in the market, this wool would be very, very expensive. And the amount of profit that the Spinners Guild here at Oxford produces is equal to the value of the input goods minus the value of the output goods, the cloth, minus the input goods, the wool, and this is how you get the potential profit. So by virtue of having wool production in the same market, we are going to have cheaper inputs, and these cheaper inputs translate into a better margin, because if this wool Spinners Guild, if this portion that was the input of the wools, if this was 50% higher, right, we would have an input cost of 25, and our margin would only be 3 instead of 28. And so by virtue of having larger markets, you will always, or almost always, have a supply and demand in a situation where you're going to have more profit, with a big wrench that gets thrown in there as it relates to control, which we will get to in just a second. Okay, so why don't we just urbanize everything and just radiate from the capital? Why have we chosen to just keep these rural? Because we obviously have enough money to urbanize. You know, we talked about compounding effects. Why don't we just sprawl more? And one of the issues is, there's two issues here. One is diminishing marginal returns, and the second is sometimes making more money makes you less money. And the diminishing marginal returns is that a lot of buildings, once you have satisfied the demand, really aren't going to make a lot. This Jewelers Guild will only make 0.06, because all profit of everything is driven by supply and demand. So if the demand's not there, you're not going to make profit. A lot of your demand is driven by your pops demanding goods, and these goods demands create profitable opportunities for you, either for RGOs in the case of Chile, or buildings in the case of fine cloth. And so we have these opportunities to make profit. As we satisfy these opportunities, it becomes more and more marginal for us to continue to build those buildings. So you see that there's not a fine cloth maker here, or there is. We, by adding levels, would only get 0.42. And this encourages you to specialize and build economies of scale and build around input goods. And this is a type of things that we're going to discuss a little bit more in just a second. But the more complicated thing is that sometimes making you money makes you less money. And if we take a look at Newcastle's control is actually pretty good. Let's find a place with bad control. So we have, do we have an urban area with really bad control? Okay, let's take Randor, for example. Okay, which we'll probably want to downgrade. The only reason we have it is because its medicaments is worth upgrading over. But in Randor, in the case of Randor, we can build some stuff in here, and we could build, let's say, a Spinners Guild, and it'll make half a ducat. Well, the problem is that as we build more and more Spinners Guild, we will increasingly decrease the marginal returns of extra Spinners Guilds, but we'll also make all of our Spinners Guilds everywhere else less profitable. And so this might make half a ducat. It might make half a ducat, but as we use more and more of these opportunities of making small amounts of money in locations with really low control, what will happen is we'll drive down the price of wool. And if we remember, coming back over to Oxford here, our value that we produce is equal to the goods that are sold, the 13 amount of wool here, or spun cloth, minus the inputs. That means if we drive down the price of wool by producing more of it, the price of cloth by producing more of it, we will actually make less out of this Oxford location. So we're making half a ducat over here in Randor, at Radnor, and we're making less in Oxford now. And in general, if it weren't for control, this would be kind of irrelevant. We would just say, let's get the more money, and we continue to get it. However, when we make a piece of cloth here, in terms of market access, we just make less cloth. That's the moderating factor, and so that is not a big deal. We would just produce less of it, that's fine. But as it relates to control, we are still producing the cloth here. We are still producing the cloth here, and it is decreasing the amount of contribution that we get from other locations, and it's decreasing the contribution we are getting from locations with more than double the control. And so if we add half a ducat of profit here, and then we end up losing, anything more than 0.25 ducats of profit here, we will actually lose money by making money. And so what this means is control is really important, and is more important than what it looks. And as the margins on your buildings get squeezed tighter and tighter, when the margins are huge, you just don't care. But as the margins get squeezed tighter and tighter, it becomes more and more important that you build in locations with high control, because the locations that have low control are actually going to kill your profit in a very, very slight way. Now, this is complex, and if you don't want to play around this, that's probably fine. This is a little in the weeds. If you're caring about this, you're probably already cracked, caked out anyways, and you have enough gold, and it doesn't matter. But there is an effect where building in locations where you have less control is going to make those buildings in high control areas less profitable, and it can do so in such a way that making this half a ducat actually loses us ducats, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, to sort of reiterate a bit of the takeaway here, if we want to specifically build more in locations with high control and high market access, and we want to build more of these production buildings in these locations, and we know we're eventually going to exhaust opportunities for profitable buildings within a market, and we know we don't want to just create more markets, and all of these things are combined, then we are going to want to, all things equal, because we won't necessarily want to add a bunch of buildings here in Radnor, we are going to want to urbanize around areas where we have high control. Notably, urbanizing does push up your control. So here, and here, let's do the clean map. So around here, and around here. And then what we are going to want to do is also build where we have high market access. It's not quite as important, but we can move markets around. And so you will build the markets or move the markets more around your proximity than the other way around. And so if you look here, we effectively have 3 power bases. We have a power base in London proper. We have a power base in the lowlands, notably extending kind of along this entire route. And then we have another power base over here. And so these are 3 locations or 3 areas around which urbanization is very, very effective. All right, let's take a look at the other 2 things that are going to be throttling you, and that is things related to the production level. In here, we have 1 base and 5 by virtue of it being a city, but we're also getting from development 7.24 and from population 13.5. And having more levels is going to be useful for a couple of reasons. First of all, actually, before we get into that, it's important to note that this is a guild. It's a rank 1 building. For rank 2 buildings, you're actually going to have a little bit of different numbers. You're going to be getting the same from base and population, but development is going to give you more, and the city rank is going to give you more. So our max level for guilds is 26. For workshops, it's going to be 42. Now, this max level is important for 2 reasons. 1, you can just build more of the industry that is best. Not all of these industries are equal. You can build more of these industries that are best in areas with high control and high market access. The pressure on you to have more of these goods just in general is something that forces you to sprawl out. We mentioned that you don't want to just sprawl out needlessly, but if you have more profitable opportunities, if you're above that 0.5 level, you do want more urban locations, because we have run out of places that we can make books in London, right? We can't make any more books in London. We can come over here and we can make some books. So this is going to allow you to build more of these key industries. An important thing to note here is that we do have looming over us the max total building level. Now, this is created at a base level. This is higher because we are a city location location rank. We are getting a little bit from it being a market center, we're getting a little bit from a capital, and we're getting a huge chunk from development. But this said, because our max levels are rising with the newer types of buildings for each tier, this is going to push us more and more towards specialization, because we are not going to be able to support as many max total buildings. And when you go over this limit, you are going to have a very sharp soft cap where it is going to dramatically increase the cost of your buildings, giving you way more months to replace the cost of the building in terms of generating profit. But the second reason here that you want to have this higher and higher level is related to production efficiency. Production efficiency does not work like throughput in Victoria 3. Production efficiency is a straight up output modifier. If we hover this here, we see at base level, our printers would produce 41 books, okay? And these 41 books would sell for an amount, and then we would get the profit, this type of thing. We have a lot of production efficiency bonuses here, though, and one of them is coming from the levels of the building. So we get an economies of scale bonus, and this is equal to 25%. Now, just to kind of illustrate how powerful this is, our production efficiency here is close to 2/3, right? We're getting roughly 166% of what we would get in output. Instead of getting 41, we're actually producing 67 total books here, right? Because of our production efficiency bonus. And this means we will be able to sell them for more income. So we're selling all these books for 158. Despite these books being really cheap, we are still getting a profit of 20. We are actually collapsing the price of books because we are building so many. But our input cost is 138. So if we lost our production efficiency bonus, we would lose, the 2/5 of the amount that we are getting from our income, right? Because 166% minus that 66%, you're minusing 2/5, and so you would get what is that going to be? You would get minus 60 off the value here that we're getting in income, and so we would only be generating 90 in income, roughly speaking. And with 90 in income, we would not be able to pay the price of the input goods, and the building would be unprofitable. It would be wildly unprofitable. It'd be minus 40 or 50 in the hole, depending on, being more precise with the math. And so this is a huge reason why we are able to maintain that profit. Even if we decrease this by 25%, I think that's still enough to put this building underwater. So it's only by virtue of these high levels that we are able to produce so much of it and push this price down, achieving this really low price. And we're not going to get too much into trade, kind of in this one, but one of the reasons why we can export so much of this book is because the price is so low. You can export things, right, if you have a difference between the price of the exporting market that is lower than the other price. We have a price that is minus 51% relative to base price. And so by virtue of us having these more economies of scale bonuses, pushing the price down, we can export more of these goods. Our exports will create demand, pushing up the price slightly, because effective supply and effective demand, these are trade. Trade is not counted for as much, but we can push up the demand for the books, allowing these industries to be more profitable and dump the books to other people's market, effectively stealing their supply. And this is in part facilitated by us having high development and also having high population, allowing us to build these higher levels that will have these bigger production efficiency bonuses. And so, all things equal, you will want to build in areas where you have a lot of development, or you could see over here, we have areas where we have a lot of pops. So even though these areas might not have as much control as some of the other locations we have, they are going to be getting more max levels. You see the max level is 12 there, and if we take a look at control, it's 88 control, but if we take a look at here, the math comes out to this just barely being over 12, but it was at 11 before. It did not used to be 12, it just passed the threshold, and this will pass the threshold to 13 before this location does. So even though there's less control, you will have more potential levels. And if we find a city with relatively low population, because I think that this is not any type of slouch, if we find a city with, we won't find a city with a low population, but the idea is that we are able to get more levels of the building by virtue of having more both population and also development. All right, so from a macro perspective, your population and also your development are quite a bit more static, generally speaking, in terms of where is going to have higher development and pop, and also where currently is higher development and pop. It's more static than where your capital is, or where you put market centers. So even though your capital, your control and your market access are informing your power base and you want to build around your power base, you can move your power base around the fact that you have high development in an area, or you are expecting high development, which we will talk about with terrain, or by virtue of you having a good amount of pop in the location. And you can see here, we do have a large amount of pop kind of in this location. We have a large amount of pop here. And of course, in the capital, we have a large amount of pop, but we have a large amount of pop in London because it is the capital and because it is the market capital. It is siphoning off pops here. It would not be, without considering other factors that make us not want to do this, it would not be insane to put the capital, let's say here, for example, because this is in a bigger scrum of a lot higher pops in this area. And this sort of brings us to our first heuristic, which is you don't want to urbanize areas that have low population. And if you take a look at our urbanization map mode, at least earlier in the game, this was all the areas with the lowest population that we left unurbanized that are around the capital. And there's several reasons you don't want to urbanize an area with low population. You're going to get less max building levels, but also very importantly, you are going to get more population growth here. Population growth is going to fuel demand. You prefer to have more pops, and even though pops are likely going to migrate from Stoke all the way to London, we would still like to have more population growth. We would have diminishing returns if we were to build a bunch of urban stuff out here anyways, and would possibly even negative returns, and by virtue of keeping it rural, we can generate population, and if we were to urbanize it, we would not be able to hit as high max levels, and it's possible we would not even be able to create profitable buildings if we are really scraping the bottom of the barrel on the margins. And so even if a location doesn't have an attractive, RGO, which lumber is relatively attractive, it still can make it sense to leave it rural if the population is low. However, let's take a look at a different area of the world and consider the population capacity here. This place only has a population capacity of like 15,000. We see it's 10,000 base, closeness to the equator, 5,000. All this together, we get 20,000 capacity. And so that's not a whole lot of capacity. If we look, we could probably find a place that is bit more densely populated. And if we look at the population growth here, we see that the population growth is 0.38 because the large or the available free land is only 0.02. Even though it's rural, getting 0.1 growth, we would still probably want to urbanize this location because it has virtually no pop cap available, and also the pop cap that it does have is going to be really low relative to a town. So if we turn this into a town and then turn this into a city, the total population in terms of the flat number would be plus 120k. And if it's a plus 120k, we actually would achieve more pop growth even if we build nothing else in here, but we would want to build civilian infrastructure in here and these types of things, and these are valuable. So specifically, as your population approaches, kind of these upper levels, you want to generally urbanize. And if you are completely capped on pop, I'm not sure that we have an area on the map where we can see a place that is completely pop capped, you are going to be achieving zero population growth in these locations. Now, they do have pops that want to migrate out, generally speaking, but for this, you are going to want to urbanize it because you are not getting any population growth. If you upgrade this to a city or an urban area, you are going to achieve more pops and also more higher tier pops, which is another pressure on you to urbanize, even if you are having and experiencing and not wanting to build in these locations. Something that they are still giving you is the potential for more of these nobles, clerics, and burghers, these higher tier pops. If we compare this location to, let's say, an urban area with the same, we will see that there's a lot more nobles, right? A lot more clerics, and there's also the creation of burghers. And so pops are also driving demand. Now, this demand would be decreased by virtue of us not getting as much pop growth in some sort of sense, but in a more immediate sense, the urbanization would drive up, the expenses that we have, which would drive up prices, which would give us more profitable opportunities for buildings here. And so there's a lot of multifaceted things that are going on as it relates directly to population, but the general heuristic, if something has a low pop, don't promote it. And if something is approaching its capacity, it becomes more and more attractive to promote it because it's missing out on growth. You notice a key difference here. We only have 50K, we have 50K instead of 10K base. Being in desert specifically makes you really want to urbanize. This is a little bit of a contrast where the woods is going to be giving 50K at the base level. So plus 20K on top of this isn't this huge thing, but plus 120K, right, is really going to increase the available free land, which is going to drive growth. But right now, there's a ton of available free land. Our population growth is good. We want to just leave it rural so that it grows the pops a little bit more. All right, next up we have terrain, and when we say terrain, we mean topography, vegetation, and also climate. For these will generally affect both proximity, which will allow you to generate more control, and this is a consideration, although we will not be fully exploring how to increase proximity, and it is also going to affect your development quite strongly because of the modifiers that are going to appear on the terrain, and finally, it is going to affect your max pop capacity. Your max pop capacity is generally driven almost entirely by terrain modifiers, and so this is going to inform both population growth in an area, which informs the amount of actual population you get there, as well as population capacity in an area, which is going to, inform kind of your top end, what you can achieve in terms of getting extra levels by virtue of having the location have a lot of pops. So with that said, coming in on the kind of one that is least influential is going to be climate. The reason it's least influential is because usually you don't have much of a choice in terms of what climate you're building in. There's a few locations where this is an exception, and in particular, Mediterranean is the best climate, giving you plus 150% pop capacity. You notice here, cold arid is not giving you any bonus. So for Castile specifically, you will start out with most of your pop in the north, but you'll actually get a lot more pop growth in the south, such that over the course of the game, you could end up having an enormous population in the south as a result of the extra population growth that you are yielding by having a much bigger pop capacity in your locations. You will generally be getting more growth. You can see here a large or available free land, 0.17, and if we select a location with a similar population, we selected one with 20K, we can see that up here we will be getting quite a bit less from large available land in the location. Well, not a lot less, but we are getting less here with the 0.15, and so all things equal, you will want to build in areas that have a positive modifier towards pop capacity, which are going to be oceanic, Mediterranean, subtropical. In particular, you have areas down here which are very polarized, where you have Mediterranean along with hot arid, but for the most part you're going to just have kind of one type that you can build in, and it's not going to inform your decisions too much. Next up, we have topography and vegetation, kind of going to talk about them together to some extent. As it relates to constructing a power base, you are looking for a clearing of grassland / farmland and flatland. And so this is going to inform how you think about this. So very often you want to toggle between the two, but to talk about them individually, topography, you want flatland because it has no modifiers on it. Everything else will have a negative modifier to either proximity, or everything else will have a negative modifier to proximity, where it will be more expensive to move through that area, which will decrease your ability to get control there. But most of these areas will also have a negative impact on your ability to get development. And so we see local development growth minus 33%. So whatever it is at game start, whatever the difference between the dev is between a place that's a wetland versus a flatland, over the course of the game, that difference is going to get bigger and bigger. And so this means you're going to get less possible levels from the development, but also development, which we haven't really discussed this, development really affects population, migration attraction by a whole lot. It is one of the biggest forces for migration attraction, and so you will have this development as a factor. You see 0.06. In London, we will have an enormous modifier from development, 0.18. This really drives development, although it used to be a stronger modifier. And so you are going to also have more pops by virtue of having more development. And this is going to be true for all of these terrains that are not flatland. I think that in particular, Plateau does not have a negative effect on development growth, or it's very small relative to its proximity impact, but you want flatland to be where you are building cities. This doesn't mean you never build on top of these other things, but it is preferable for you to build flatland. Similarly, with the vegetation, you want everything to be farmland or grassland for largely the same reasons. Although farmland does give local development, it does give negative proximity impact, so it takes more proximity points to travel through them. You are going to be getting both percentage monthly development growth, and also you are going to be getting this huge bonus to your pop capacity. Your pop capacity base level is driven by vegetation. The biggest one you can get is farmlands, and it is double the next one. So everything related to pop growth and pop capacity we've discussed is more pronounced on them. It more than overcomes a reason to leave something rural to produce more food effect you have on the farmlands. You generally want to urbanize, although they will be really good at producing food. The next best in terms of pop capacity is 50k on the grasslands. There's 50k in a bunch of other locations, but in particular, these are going to be the areas that are not impeding either development or proximity. Sparse land is going to be 25k, not going to impede stuff. If I recall correctly, desert is also going to not impede stuff, it impedes development growth by a whole lot. And when you have these other vegetation, woods will impede your ability to get dev growth by quite a bit, and also proximity impact woods even worse. I believe tropical is even worse, or jungle is even worse. We have proximity impact plus 25%, dev growth minus 25%. I think the jungle is really bad for specifically the development growth, where you are going to be getting the monthly development growth 30% and proximity impact 50%. So taking all this together, because you know that you want higher dev locations for your urban areas, and this is going to be preferable because you cannot urbanize everywhere, or you don't want to urbanize everywhere, you're going to prefer grassland and farmland here. All right, next up we have rivers, harbors, natural harbors, and just regular coastline. In general, it is going to be preferable to build on the coast for a couple of reasons. One, you get 10% development growth positive modifier, and two, there are going to be buildings that can only be built on the coast in the naval buildings and some of the military buildings, and so gaining access to this, your ability to get sailors, is going to be useful. But also, a lot of these buildings are going to give you harbor capacity. Harbor capacity is another thing that you will generally want to urbanize on because you want to stack it as high as possible very often. We noticed that Antwerp was actually a source of proximity through which a lot of things traveled. We are getting a lot of proximity. Even a place that is on the coast itself is traveling through Antwerp first. And the reason why is Antwerp has a really good natural harbor. Topped on top of that natural harbor, we have those buildings that can only be built in urban areas that are pushing the harbor capacity up to 100%. This harbor, or a little over 100%, this harbor capacity makes it so that if we look at the proximity map mode and we look at the segment going into here, we are getting a minus 75% discount, a little bit above this, because you get 75% of your harbor capacity as discount in terms of this cost of the segment to enter the port. And so this means it spends very, very little proximity. So for the purposes of creating a power base or facilitating a power base, building in areas that have good natural harbors is going to be good, because once you have the natural harbor, you can stack the buildings on top of it, allowing you to get more harbor capacity, and this means you're going to end up having more proximity, which, coming to the control map mode, is telling the story here of all of these zones that are connecting through Antwerp having more control than otherwise. And so you are going to want to urbanize in locations with good harbor capacity as well. Alright, so the rivers are going to pull you in two directions. Before I mention anything about that, though, I know someone's going to say, hey, the river map mode's not in my bottom things. What gives? Where's the river map mode? You can only see it if you assign it as a hotkey. This is not a joke. It is not available without it being a hotkey. If it is now, that's because they've changed it, but right now you have to assign it to the river's hotkey to be able to see it. But in particular, you're going to be pulled in two directions. You are going to be pulled to keep your rivers rural for the purposes of getting good food production, and you are going to be pulled to keep them urban. So here's the food production, province food, and also food productivity. You notice along the river we do have a little bit of better food productivity. You are also going to be pulled to keep it to urbanize it in order to get veins through which you get extra proximity. And the reason this comes down to is buildings. If we take a look at the buildings that rivers allow, they allow a few buildings. In particular, irrigation gives you local food production plus 5%. So if you're trying to produce as much food as possible in a location, you want to keep it rural, because by keeping it rural, you are able to build more levels of the RGO so you can get more flat food by which to multiply by by your productivity bonus, which again, as you can see, we have relatively high along this river. So you will get 5% of food production bonus, and you can also facilitate a little pop growth. Now this is a little bit of pop growth, but just a reminder, if this is in a desert, if you have a desert river tile, this is going to represent a huge uptick in the available possible or the available pop capacity. So it's going to be a big deal. But second of all, you can also build bridges. Bridges, it doesn't matter where it's rural or urban, you're going to build it. If there's a road on top of the river, you can build a bridge, you could get minus 5% proximity cost. The thing that pulls you towards urbanization, however, is this other infrastructure building, the Pound Lock Canal, which can only be built in cities, not in towns, only in cities. And so this will give you additional local proximity cost. And without going into too great a detail, the more proximity cost reduction you stack, the more effective it becomes. And so very often you will have rivers by which you can draw veins through which you get a lot of additional proximity cost reduction. That way you can really push control in a strong way. And so you are going to be pulled to urbanize for control reasons and pulled to keep rural for food reasons in broad strokes. You can see here we do have the Pound Lock Canal and also the bridge factoring in, and so our base cost would have been 15 and it's reduced to around 9 by virtue of us stacking all of these percentage modifiers here. Alright, so next up we have probably the most straightforward and also the most important, but there's a little bit of subtlety to it, and that's you don't want to urbanize over good resources. Now, I don't think we'll go over which resources are good. We'll just include a link in the description to our resource tier list, which is mostly accurate. We made it pre-release, but you don't want to urbanize over good resources. The reason being is this plus 100% maximum RGO size modifier, which to be fair, will get diluted as you get more and more of these modifiers. It will get diluted out because it will represent a smaller and smaller increase in the amount of RGO levels you would get by virtue of keeping a place rural relative to the baseline of getting it urbanized. But right now we don't have a lot of these modifiers, so this represents a whole lot. And so just intuitively, like a place like the silver, we don't want to urbanize it because we're actually going to get a huge amount of tax base from the silver here. But also this plays into some of the factors that we've discussed already, which is we're going to have decreasing marginal returns right on these buildings where our margins are going to get smaller and smaller. If we are going to stop building somewhere, it makes sense to stop building in the locations that have the best opportunities for growth just by virtue of a place being an RGO, because we didn't really push this as a kind of idea too much. RGOs have no input. They have no input, so they're always profitable. And this means you can never get like this diminishing marginal return, this like, oh, well, you get diminishing marginal returns, but you don't ever get this, oh, I built a thing, so now I lose money even though it says it's making money and my brain hurts. You don't get any of this. Another thing is that it might seem initially, hey, okay, but we still are going to urbanize all of our highest pop areas. That way we can make use of the pops. But the truth is, two things. RGO max level is informed by population as well. And it's not an extremely robust effect, but we are getting an additional half a silver level by virtue of the 20,000 pops here. But this is also affected by these percentage modifiers. So we are getting an additional level by virtue of these pops here. But also there's a lot of rural buildings that are worth building, like the wood choppy places. And you can see here we're employing a lot of pops in these fiber crop places. There's a lot of things you can build in rural that are more supportive rurals, stuff like the masonry, that can utilize the population there such that it's not a waste, and this frees up the need to have these in urban locations and use up the pops there for that purpose. And so by virtue of keeping more places rural, you do get to provide more of a supporting role for your locations, and it is better to, all things equal, prefer to build these in the places with, or it is preferable to keep the places with good resources more rural. Also, these supporting role types of things like the masonry, these are things where we don't care about the profit at all. We're subsidizing this. We just want more masonry in the market. With the logging, we will be subsidizing it. We just want more logging in the market. We don't care. And so the fact that it's not profitable if we build it far away in these rural areas or this type of thing, it doesn't really matter. We just want more of the good. And so we are just going to keep producing it in order to generate that. It's probably worth emphasizing as it relates to RGOs and market access here that another thing is that when we're sourcing inputs via RGOs, inputs where we don't care about the tax base as much, or things that are food, stuff like livestock, we really don't care if it's on the edge of the market. We just care that it's being produced, right? We care that the lumber is being produced, added to the market, and lack of market access doesn't make it so less lumber is produced. It doesn't make it so that the less livestock is produced, and the livestock will still contribute food to the market even if it's not contributing tax base. Most of the value of livestock is in the food where it's producing a food rather than the 1.5 on the tax base. So as it relates to kind of not wanting to urbanize locations that are on the edges of your market, similarly, you still get a lot of value out of having these rural areas from the perspective of they source inputs for your entire economy, and this is a valuable thing. And so generally speaking, lack of market access is less painful on a lot of these goods where they are inputs. Even something like iron where the base price is 3 and this is a decently high base price, you're still more than happy to, if it has low market access and you're just using it as an input to make your stuff more profitable. The stuff you really want kind of to have better market access is going to be stuff like the saffron or the silver, although saffron you'll get plenty of value just by trading it even if you have poor market access. Another reason or way in which RGOs inform where you want to urbanize is you want to urbanize next to RGOs that are used as input goods for industries that are generally pretty prolific, which is tools and a cloth and some other ones. But in particular, let's take a look at Oxford here. So Oxford is in a province with Hainley and also Banbury. And those two locations both have wool. And because of this, Oxford gets a production efficiency bonus. Remember, this is more valuable than the percentage it looks like in terms of your margin. Sometimes it turns your margin completely positive. We are getting plus 10% production efficiency from wool in Oxford. So all other things equal, you would prefer to urbanize when you see a good input in that location. So specifically down here, we have the lumber and the iron. And if we take a look at our urbanization map mode, we've urbanized over the lumber, which isn't something we always do, but the reason we've done that is because we wanted the production efficiency bonus on the tools here. We also get the production efficiency on the firearms here, but it is proportional to how big an input that is. And so this is also going to shape your play where you are looking for production efficiency bonuses in provinces that have inputs you like, and this is going to cause you to urbanize areas you would not otherwise because you are chasing that production efficiency bonus so that you can get a better output. You can see here it's a smaller percentage on the cannons, and the cannons are not profitable enough to employ at this juncture. Alright, next up, let's talk about archetypes. Now, we gave a lot of examples that worked for this when we were looking at England, and so we're going to give a little bit of a different look in Austria. Some of these ideas may be kind of repetitive, but coming in here, we are going to start with a breadbasket location, of which this Ganserdorf is a breadbasket location for us. It is producing 222 food. And the way we do this is we start off with a food RGO that is 8+. In the case of the old world, this is rice, which is 10, and cattle and wheat, which is 8, and in the new world it's going to be potatoes and maize, which are both 8. So you will have a very high amount of base food. We have 88 food coming in from the wheat, and you will combine this with other sources of base food production like the sheep farm, which is going to produce at base value half a wool, which is 2.5 food per level, and then also if you wanted to push it a little bit, the fruit orchard, which is not anywhere near as efficient, which is going to produce fruit, only gives 4 food per level, but you can build this as well. This requires jungle, forest, grasslands, farmlands, or sorry, jungle, woods, not forest, a little bit curious. And then the sheep farm, which is generally preferable, is going to require grasslands, farmlands, or sparse, meaning that the overlap on these is going to only be in grasslands and farmlands if you wanted the absolute best for this. But coming back here, we are going to be able to, in these locations, also build stuff like rural stuff that we otherwise want. Like here, we have more fiber crops production. But also, with all that flat food, we are going to combine it with percentage food modifiers from the farming village. In this case, we are getting percent food and flat food because it is producing cattle alongside this, and the irrigation. And something worth noting on the irrigation is not very building slot efficient, but is very pop efficient. And so it tends to shine more in rural areas because it only employs 250 pops per level, which for a rural location is a very low amount because most things are 1k. And so we have 8 levels, it only employs 2k pop, and it is giving us plus 40% food, and also this additional local food capacity allowing us to grow a little bit better, which will be better in rougher terrain. We probably have some places with really low food kind of potentials that are going to be benefiting a lot from irrigation, like something like this, where look at this, we have in terms of our flat capacity, we have 2.7k. So if we slapped down a whole bunch of irrigation, this would actually increase our pop growth by a decent amount because we have such a low top end here. But coming back to this location, we have 222 food, and this is very important for us in this Vienna market. To emphasize like kind of why, this is the totality of the market, and overall, we don't have that much food RGOs, so we're a little bit light on food. And then also, we have some issues as it relates to both our provincial food. You can see we have a lot of urbanization. This province alone, minus 400 food. In the breadbasketing province, plus 315, allowing it to support it, but we also have negative food productivity on the mountains. We have a lot of mountains, and so this location is going to be helping us out a lot. Next up, we have the really straightforward. If it's a good RGO, really expensive RGO at base price, here's the base price of 8, you don't urbanize it, basically ever. And so for silver and gold, you pretty much never urbanize it unless you have an extremely good reason for it. And anything that's a 4 or 5 plus base price RGO, you have to want a good reason to urbanize it, generally speaking, although there are going to be reasons to urbanize it. If we take a look at the tax base, just kind of drive this home and look at just how much we're getting from this, this is one of our higher tax-based locations just off the silver. And while we could potentially squeeze out more tax base based on urbanizing this, turning it into a city, doing a whole bunch of this type of stuff, we would probably be able to get more tax base out of this location. This would deny us opportunities in some of these locations in the north to get these additional tax base, and so we want to keep it rural. Incidentally, it's often going to be the case that on the edge of your market, you are going to have poor control and good resources, in which case bailiffs are very good. They give local proximity score plus 20. This is going to be something that's common. You see that we have stuff like gold over here, keeping it rural, and we are going to have a bailiff down there as well. Alright, next up we have an archetype that I don't have a very good example for in this run, which is a sort of rural hub. You urbanize by virtue of not having that good of options and it being an okay urbanization. And this is kind of an okay example here, where the idea being is that we get to upgrade some pops to higher tier levels. They are going to demand more stuff, and it's not that bad that we upgrade this to urban, because the primary thing we're losing is pop growth, right? But something you can build in urban locations is you can build granaries, which give additional available pop capacity, or additional available, food capacity. And so here we would get an additional 600 food capacity, and we would get it at a very low rate for laborers. And one of the things that affects your population growth is going to be you having a large food capacity in the province, which is covered up by our big head, but it is going to be you having a large food capacity in the province. And so we could improve this modifier. So for particularly large provinces, adding locations and urbanizing them and turning them into having them turn out granaries can be useful. You can also get additional of this from the farming village, but you can't necessarily build the farming village everywhere. You can see here forest village, market village. You have to have specific types of RGOs to be able to build a farming village. So here we could get local food capacity, but with the wine, we can't get local food capacity. And so this is one of the reasons why we said as a rural hub, the wine would make more sense. We don't really value the RGO that much. It's kind of okay. It's the price of wine, I think, is not that high. If we take a look here, it's 0.97. And so what we could do instead of doing this, we could urbanize it, use it to build granaries, and this would increase the population growth of the other locations in the province if the province is sufficiently large and allows us to push up the local food capacity. In particular, you're wanting to do this on poor resources in kind of the outskirts of areas, and so another example for us here, it might be someplace like this wild game location. The pop here is really low, so I don't know if you would want to do it here, but in particular, it's going to very quickly approach its pop capacity, right? where you are not going to be able to generate as much pop growth by virtue of there not being a lot of available free land. If this location had 12k pop, right, we would be very quickly losing out on this. And so what we could turn this into is an opportunity to improve the population growth for the rest of the locations in this province. And so this would help out. And so the rural hub is kind of a weird one, but it is going to be a smattering of urban locations in kind of the edges of your market, is going to be something that is reasonable to push up demand for goods, allow you to build granaries, and because you just don't have that much opportunity on an RGO that is just not going to be very valuable. Base price of wild game is 1, only produce 3.5 food, and the prices collapsed. Really can't make much out of it, and so this is one way in which we could leverage this into advantage for ourselves. A bit of a point of emphasis here, we are not urbanizing it to build urban buildings, we are urbanizing it for other reasons. We don't want to build a bunch of random buildings all the way out here where we have very little control, but instead we are building it for the benefits of being able to produce urban infrastructure and also the ability to have more of these pops. Next archetype is kind of what we looked at in Egypt, and it's really kind of the only place where this is like very, very obvious, and that is having to do with the pop capacity either being very near pop capacity, so your population growth is so low anyways. You can see available free land 0.04 here. We would want to urbanize this because it would increase our growth, sans any other sort of consideration. But also, we can get a larger food supply here. We can also look to maybe get a production bonus. JK, it's in Arabia where the only thing you get is fruit. But the idea is if a place has a really getting close to being at capacity, you probably want to urbanize it here. So here, the wheat isn't so worth preserving, especially in a market with so much food, that we would want to not urbanize this location. And so we urbanize it, and then we unlock the pop growth, because here, it's completely halted. Our pops will demote, and we will have 0 pop growth in this location, and they will get pushed out to some extent to other locations, but we will not experience any growth unless we can migrate out faster than we can grow. So Schwaz is almost a location that we would want to upgrade because of pop capacity reasons. However, it has silver there, but because it is a forest and also has mountains topography, we have a huge negative amount on our pop capacity. Our pop capacity is only 47k, and when this is the case and the population starts to get high, you don't actually lose out on population growth by upgrading it. And if the RGO was no good, you wouldn't lose out on the RGO for upgrading it. And once that is the case, there isn't really too much of reasons to not upgrade it outside of food production, right? And so these are the kind of low friction areas where they're kind of cheap freebies to upgrade and gain the benefits of the additional, higher tier pops, your ability to build urban infrastructure, this type of stuff, but without necessarily the intention of spamming a bunch of urban buildings. Just you upgrade it because there's not much downside. And this kind of brings us to the next idea, which is a kind of a pseudo archetype, which is the urban ideal, where you want flatland and farmland, and specifically not just flatland and farmland, but you want them in a clump together with other flatland farmlands, and also with a healthy RGOs for production buildings around them. And this is like an ideal place for a power base, and we're thinking of it in terms of like an urban ideal, but Austria is not a very good example of one. We have one location that is farmlands, flatlands, but these locations will have the highest top end, and it's not the case that you just want to urbanize them because you do, but not only do you want to urbanize them, you want to construct your entire macro strategy around these types of places in terms of where you put the capital and where you place the markets. And so a better example of this would be like Naples. Naples starts out with enormous population. It starts out in a absolutely massive province, right, that has alum fiber crops. It doesn't have iron, or it doesn't have any sort of cloth. That's maybe a little bit of a downside, but it's right next to one that has wool. It is a strong natural harbor, which is something to build around, and it is going to be, in terms of farmlands, flatlands, it's flatlands, and there's this huge chunk of farmlands around. But not only is it farmlands, flatlands with a huge chunk of farmland, there's farmland in the north, and to top it all off, Mediterranean climate. So the population capacity here is massive. And so if you're playing in Italy writ large, if you're playing in Italy writ large, it is reasonable, no matter who you're playing in Italy, to eventually move your capital to Naples, as a result of it just being the absolute kind of perfect place to put, or not just your market, your capital as well, and build out your power base from here. To be fair, in Italy, it's also other locations where you have these massive clumps of farmlands, flatlands, and this type of stuff, and so there's really a lot of choices, but I do think Naples is in particular the most attractive. Another example is going to be the lowlands up here is going to be very strong per our examples with England, because it will be farmland, flatland in a lot of the locations with good RGOs for production, and also France just entirely, tons and tons of farmland, flatland, tons of top end, and also RGOs that build into stuff in the wool, the dyes, the silk, and the iron, just very, very, very strong in terms of top end. Alright, the next archetype we have is a regional archetype, and I like to call it, my locations have 300,000 pops, and I must scream, in which you generally just want to urbanize everything, because very often you will be hitting pop capacity in locations. There's one location down here at pop capacity, not capacity in a lot of these, but there is hundreds of thousands of pops here. They are going to be, a lot of flatland, grassland, farmland, all these types of things, and with these locations, the reason you want to upgrade them is because they are not really pressured by food in the slightest, so the consideration of playing around the food and avoiding the urbanization for that reason is really low, and also you need to upgrade in order to grow your pops, and so you are upgrading, but you're not pressured by food because of how the food demand works. You can see here we have the demand for pops, and we have 600 demand for food, right? And to be fair, our biggest demand is the peasants, fair enough, and then we have the nobles are demanding a lot, but we have very, very few nobles, and then the upper class are demanding also. We only have 5k nobles, and so when you proportionally have fewer and fewer upgraded pops, higher tier pops, that's nobles, clerics, burghers, your food demands will just really not be that high. And in locations, you also get an enormous amount of flat food from peasants and subsistence agriculture. Here, we are getting 277 flat, we don't have a food RGO, we don't have any buildings that are producing food, and then we get plus 94%. You can see all the modifiers here. Part of it's the bountiful harvest, but okay. And so this means that we are going to be net positive on food very, very easily, despite the fact that we've upgraded to a city and we are getting minus 33% on the food. So if we look at the food in terms of the locations, most of the provinces are plus food, and not just plus a little bit of food, plus 662, plus 445. And so generally speaking, in areas such as this, you kind of just urbanize very nearly everything, and you scratch your head a little bit, and you whine about having to upgrade a silk RGO, and you whine about having to upgrade a tea RGO, because these are relatively good, and then you whine about upgrading a cotton RGO. But the thing is also you have to scream, because the RGOs themselves will have massive levels even when urbanized by virtue of having so much pop in the location. If we take a look here, we see that we are getting nearly plus 2 levels for the pop, which is quite a lot in terms of the flat amount, which is then modified by any percentage modifier you have for the RGO. And would we be getting more if it was left rural? Yeah, sure we would. We would be getting an absolute ton. Man, that's so much. It really is. I just have this many things that I have to scream. And so you want to upgrade these locations much more aggressively by virtue of you just having so many pops and not caring at all about the food. As an extra point of clarification, you upgrade literally every food RGO in this instance, and you never do a breadbasket location, because it's completely unnecessary. Next up, we have the archetype of the strategic concession, where there's a larger factor at play, causing you to make a choice in a particular way and treating a province differently than you otherwise would. And a good example here in the Austria run is we've urbanized over this fur. We've urbanized over this fur, and fur is now standing RGO for us. To be fair, it's close to the capital, so that's fair enough, but this is a relatively valuable RGO. The profit per fur is going to be in excess of 3, and this would generally be a reason we would maybe want to keep it rural. However, Austria has a very strange sort of characteristic, which is that there is a vein of flatland, and on the other sides of it are hills and mountains, which really affect proximity impact. And so, okay, we have this vein, and then also the same vein applies to the vegetation, where you have woods on either side of this. And so through here, is where we can trace control the absolute easiest. And on top of all this, it is also a river, which incidentally makes it so that this wheat or this livestock, we also would want these as breadbasket locations because we're actually pinched for food here. But what we have instead is this row of cities. And the reason we do have this is a strategic concession to the fact that we want to have a row of pound lock canals so that we can project control easier, because this 40 is our base cost on the proximity. We have paved roads, so it's down to 15, and then we reduce it by 60% down to 6, right? All of these add up to roughly 60%, so this minus 5% going from 55 to 60%, this represents a huge decrease, and this is one of the reasons in which we can generate a lot of proximity. In fact, we've even gone out of our way to get migration attraction to be able to afford the upgrade to cities for this. And so several of these locations along the way, the fur, the livestock, and the wheat, we would otherwise not want to urbanize, but this is a strategic concession to wanting a row of pound lock canals alongside the river. We have another location that is a little bit of a smaller strategic concession, and that's this location here in Argenta. Argenta, we actually wanted to urbanize. But the reason we kept it rural was so we could build a bailiff here. And we wanted this bailiff not because we really wanted the proximity score for the fiber crops, this type of thing, but because of the urban locations we have around Argenta. We wanted specifically to have a bailiff to connect these so that they would have a very slight amount of proximity, because there was already a built-up city in Ferrara here, and there was also that we had conquered, and there was 2 other locations here that are decent enough, and we wanted to kind of increase the value of these locations, and also in particular generate more sailors by virtue of having more control, especially with the coastal locations. I think we have a few bailiffs along the coast, but this lack of control, oops, wrong button, lack of control is going to throttle our sailor count, and so sailors are not something you can just throw money at and get more of, and so playing in a kind of a little bit of a weird way to be able to get the bailiffs is something we've done. To be fair, we would be able to... Actually, is this coastal? I'm not sure if this is coastal, or if this is just next to a lake. It's not coastal, so we wouldn't be able to build any sailors here. We probably should have urbanized this, though, for the sailors, but we kind of wanted the salt because it is reasonably profitable. Another generally the sharpest reason for you ever wanting to have a strategic concession is because of a natural harbor. We don't necessarily have the best location example, but Tunis is probably a really strong one, where if we had our capital in Naples, which we think is an excellent place for a capital, we could get control over to Tunis via sea, and it has a natural harbor capacity of 100. Tunis has a DIES RGO, which we would maybe want to keep rural. To be fair, it is farmland, so that makes us want to upgrade it, but if we ignore the farmland, we otherwise would want to keep this rural, and the reason we wouldn't is because we can get a lot more proximity there, and we can only get it if this place gets to stack the extra harbor naval buildings on top of here. You really see a couple of these in Sicily as well, where you have the alum and the sugar. Both of these you'd probably want to keep rural if it were not for the harbor capacity really allowing you to get a ton of extra control into these locations. And so this is one of the most common or most pronounced reasons to want to urbanize a location. Like Aka here, if I recall correctly, has a decent RGO in sugar, but you still might end up urbanizing it, because if we take a look at where the proximity is traced, a lot of it will trace its way through Aka because it has the strong natural harbor. And so in order to get the rest of these locations good and better, we urbanize and make this concession in order to be able to establish more control for, like I said, a larger strategic reason, in this case, our proximity on the natural harbors. And that has been our video. If you guys liked the video, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and if you wanted to support the channel, a really good way to do it is if you are purchasing Paradox products, if you are purchasing them at full price, if you buy them off the official web store and you use our code GENERALIST in all caps at checkout, this will send 12% of the sale our way. It is more inconvenient because you will be emailed a code and have to put in that code rather than it just being in your Steam library, but this is a way to support the channel if you were interested. Also, other creators have this code, so you can check with them. And also, if you are not in USD, the exchange rates might differ, so you want to cross-check with Steam because one might be more expensive than the other. But other than that, other than all that, y'all have a good one. Bye-bye now.